Yeah.
Where does resolution of the conflict fit in priority from your perspective?
From where does it, in terms of Israel's priorities? I mean, it basically doesn't at this point. I mean, you don't. There's no domestic pressure to resolve the conflict at all, and there's a lot of pressure that says, "Oh no, this isn't the right time." You know, the situation's very unstable. The election, you know, the rise of the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt and the insecurity in Syria, and for Israel, there's no urgency. I mean, again, the situation is very quiet in the West Bank. The settler lobby is an integral part of the government and very powerful. I mean, there's no price that most Israelis understand to maintaining the occupation, and there's a really heavy price to ending the occupation. It's, you know, dismantling settlements. I mean, in terms of the controversy inside Israel and all of the regional insecurity, I mean, it doesn't seem like there's any movement at all, even to be renewing. You know, for years we had the peace process, right? No peace, but a lot of process. I mean, now every once in a while there's a little bit of talk about renewing that process, right? But even that, you know, there's no even negotiations. And then, I mean, in some ways for our work, it makes things simpler, right? If everything is part of the political negotiations, then the role of human rights, you know, you have to fit yourself into that process, right? Say settlements, that we say, well, settlements are illegal, should never have been built in the first place. Israel has an obligation to remove all the settlements. When you have negotiations for, say, a two-state solution, some of the settlements will remain and be annexed to Israel, and there'll be a land swap, and so, you know, I'm not going to say, no, all the settlements have to be removed, the Palestinians don't have a right to agree to something different. If there's no political process, then, you know, we revert back to Israel's and, you know, Palestinians' legal obligations. I mean, it's maybe less realistic, right? I don't think we're going to get all the settlements removed. But in terms of the messages to Israel, what the standards that we're holding Israel accountable to, from the human rights perspective, it's more clear.
There was some, I don't know, hope, expectation, anticipation that Israel would have elections around the same time, or maybe a little before the U.S. elections.
Yeah.
And then everyone was surprised when this new coalition was announced. What does the new coalition mean for anything? I mean, does it make it less likely that there's going to be any? I mean, assume Obama's reelected.
Yeah.
And historically, U.S. presidents have engaged during their second terms on this issue much more.
Yes.
Deeply. With the new coalition government here, does that make it harder, or in some way, does it open up doors for
yes.
U.S. engagement in a second term?
I mean, you could argue either way. I mean, for our issues, well, theoretically what it means is you have no real opposition in the Knesset, in the parliament, to what the government is doing, right? 90 of 120 members of Knesset are part of the government coalition, something that we never had before. I mean, always you had, you know, about half-half, right? 60%, 40% government and opposition. But in practice, you didn't have a vocal opposition on our issues beforehand. I mean, Kadima, the main bloc that now joined, is very centrist, you know, even some right-wing. You know, it was not a voice for sort of liberal, democratic human rights issues. I mean, you could argue that now there is a majority of the government that supports negotiations and a Palestinian state, right? At least the lip service. Yeah. I mean, theoretically, if Israel either was pushed or decided to renew negotiations, agree to a Palestinian state, it wouldn't bring down the government at this point, right? Kadima is in favor, some of Likud is in favor, but it's quite theoretical. I mean, there's no momentum for that.
What do you think might create a little bit of momentum?
For a peace process?
If any.
Well, if the price of occupation is higher and the benefits of occupation are lower, then people might rethink. I mean, in some ways, the price of occupation is hidden from a lot of Israelis. We have this social protest, right? There was a big social protest movement, sort of the Israeli version of the Arab Spring last summer, that now is again starting demonstrations around housing and other social welfare rights. It hasn't been any connection to the occupation. I mean, the fact that the roads inside Israel are terrible. You don't have a lot of public parks in a lot of neighborhoods, and I mean all of those sorts of investments, because so much money is invested. I mean, you could reallocate in a lot of different ways, but the huge budgetary allocations for the military, which again most Israelis don't see as linked to the occupation, right? We need a big military because we're a small country surrounded by a lot of hostile neighbors. I mean, the fact that people are hostile, maybe because of the Palestinians and their claims, again, it's not part of the consciousness. So the idea of, the investment in settlements and the, my neighborhood in Beit HaKerem, where in West Jerusalem, where housing prices are very expensive and where, people live in little apartments, nobody has a house with a yard and a, 5 miles down the road, you could rent or buy in a settlement, again, a house with a yard, I mean, something that inside Israel nobody has. So there's this, warping of the government investment. But again, it's very difficult to make that visible to Israelis. I mean, certainly the international community could also play a role in, making the occupation more expensive for Israel. I mean, that you see that there's a cost to it. Although for Israel, I mean, pressure from outside. I think it's important that because you have a rhetoric of the whole world is against us, and there's no. It's dangerous for us to make peace, and it's important to find a way to show Israelis. Well, you have this new book, Peter Beinart, this American Jewish journalist. He just wrote a book called The Crisis of Zionism.
It's fascinating book.
Primarily about American politics regarding Israel. I mean, a little bit about the occupation, but about the way American politics plays out around the occupation. And his prescription is to embrace democratic Israel and reject occupation Israel, right? That you have to do both. Because if all you do, say you have the boycott movement, which most Israelis understand, the boycott movement is under the guise of ending occupation, is really about ending the state of Israel. That's how most Israelis understand it, right? The boycott movement actually has done a very good job from their perspective in blurring the lines, right? They're boycotting settlement products, and they boycott Tel Aviv University, and they boycott the Israel Symphony. It's all the same. So then Israelis say, look, they think it's all the same, right? There's no point in pulling out of the West Bank